Sonic has a lot of games, some are loved by many people, and others are hated because they made the mistake of simply existing. Through all the ups and downs, Sonic has had some memorable games. Maybe Sonic Mania is the most memorable of them all, with classic Sonic games gone for years, and his last real appearance being in Sonic Generations, a new game for him felt almost impossible. Then, suddenly, SEGA shows up here with Sonic Mania and gives us one of the best games classic Sonic has ever had. Actually, one of the best games Sonic has had in recent times. The idea behind this project was exactly what you'd expect. SEGA wanted to pay tribute to Sonic, which explains the name Mania, making thousands of references and also bringing some small new stages. This game is really good because it introduced the classic Sonic to a new generation and also showed that Sonic still had plenty of life left in 2D gameplay, which for a long time people thought SEGA couldn't do anymore. Actually, it was made by a group of Sonic fans who used to make fan games and ended up being hired by SEGA itself to create this project. By revisiting some stages in much larger, reworked versions, it gave players a sense of both nostalgia and something new. This game for many people was one of the best experiences and maybe one of the best ways to get to know the classic Sonic nowadays. The two-act setup, where you go from an act with the sub-boss and then an act with the main boss. Special stage. A stage with low poly graphics that really remind you of Sonic R if you played it. All of this was a great moment to enjoy Sonic games once again, and I believe that a lot of people will always recommend this game because, besides being cheap, it's also a game made with a lot of care since it's made by fans for fans. And it also added something new, which was the modern core introduced in the Sonic Mania Plus DLC. The idea is simple. You can switch between characters in pairs, and there's no life counter. When you die, basically you can only recover one more life by getting the character back. This gives a certain dynamism so you can keep playing, choosing, and switching between characters and abilities. Besides bringing Mighty and Ray, two protagonists who haven't appeared in Sonic games since Sega Sonic Arcade, which is a game made exclusively to be played on a Japanese arcade machine where the controller was a trackball, literally a little ball. But in contrast, Sonic Mania also had another game that was being released practically at the same time, right? Since both came out in the same year, which kind of killed the hype for Sonic. And of course, I'm talking about Sonic Forces, a game where Sonic gets beaten up embarrassingly by everyone and built up hype for a game set in Sonic's post-apocalyptic world. I mention it a lot, but the hype for this game was so high that it's such a huge disappointment to look back on it. Besides, its story practically made no sense. Taking a mythological creature from the Sonic universe like Chaos and just seeing it get beaten by a hit from classic Sonic, who shows up pretty much out of nowhere, is one of the most disappointing things the series has ever had, and honestly, none of this makes any sense. Not to mention that the creature didn't even have a boss fight, man. And what happened here? Besides that, we also had the great avatar, Broganage, a character you could create, and he would use weapons that are based on wisps, those classic aliens from Sonic Colors. This game completely changed its approach, becoming one of the simplest and easiest Sonic games ever. You can finish it in an afternoon, so like if the game was rented for 3 hours at a LAN house, you could beat it quickly. And this basically created a perception that Sonic doesn't have good 3D games since Sonic Mania was released months earlier. And basically all the hate ended up falling on this one, since Sonic Mania was endlessly praised compared to Sonic Forces, which was brutally criticized by everyone on the internet, and even today, people still talk badly about this game. To be honest, it's not a really bad game, but it has a lot of terrible choices. It's said that Sonic was actually being held captive and tortured for months inside Eggman's base, but when he gets out, he's completely happy. And the presence of the avatar here could have been much more iconic, but the number of stages with classic Sonic really broke the story's pace, and his arc is pretty much unnecessary. If you take him out of the game will pretty much end the same way. I think that's a shame because Sega was taking advantage, for example, of the key factors that made Sonic Generations so well received, but that's the thing, Sonic Forces was just Sonic Forces. For every popular Sonic game, there's a disliked one, and I'll discuss that in this video. Leave a comment, but go easy on the keyboard, okay? Because you can agree or disagree, and I disagree here, you'll understand. When I stop to think about Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I remember exactly the kind of iconic game it was. I found out about this game very late, but when I went to play it, I saw that it was one of the most ambitious games Sega had to close out the cycle of Sonic games made by them for the Genesis. For those who don't know, Sega used to make video game consoles in the past. Sega, the one that will never come back. But when Sonic was getting his new games, it was pretty much inevitable to imagine that he would have a very epic end to that era. This was the game series that ended its trilogy, divided into two parts, not only with Sonic 3 but also with the story that comes after, Sonic and Knuckles. Here you have an expansion with more stages and also a new playable character and, in a way, an extra campaign. It's an epic game, no other way to put it. But while SEGA released this Sonic game as the finale of Sonic's 2D run on the Genesis, its Handheld, well, also got a 2D game, but it's a game that people hate. 2 years later, SEGA released Sonic Blast here. They were released for Sega's handheld called the Game Gear, which existed and competed with the Game Boy until the release of Pokémon. And its idea was to be an epic 2D game with pre-rendered 3D graphics. Yes, everything on the screen is a 3D model converted into a sprite, letting you play it like a 2D game with enhanced graphics. But we're talking about a handheld system with a very limited screen, and that ended up really hurting the game's resolution. So much so that the graphics don't look very decent at all. So much so that a lot of things ended up getting really lost. And keep in mind, we're talking about the improved version of the Game Gear. There's a Master System version that's ultra rare and exclusive to Brazil, which also ended up losing a lot of visual detail because of that. The game itself was one of those simpler Sonic games. A grass stage, a desert stage, a lava stage with a lot of holes. I don't even know exactly what's coming out of those holes. A water stage and of course Eggman's castle, just for a change. I like this game because it was really different, but honestly it's undeniable that there's someone here on the internet who hates this game in every possible way. There are two types of comments I see about this game. Either people hate it or they simply haven't heard of it. And comment here if you know this game because man, I'm surprised by the comments. Here, for some reason, Sonic pretty much has a double jump and he's also the famous Sonic in easy mode. Every time Sonic gets hit, he actually only loses 10 rings, not all the rings at once. It's borderline bizarre, but that's what ends up happening. Even so, the game managed, man, to pull off the feat of being the game that closed out the saga, which could have had better graphics. When you look at, for example, Triple Trouble or Sonic Chaos that came out before, for sure, those graphics are better. Even so, I like the idea of this game because you can play as Sonic or as Knuckles, who has different abilities and is also playable in this game. And the 3D special stage isn't exactly that immersive or that cool, besides it's very punishing. Since if you don't collect 50 rings by the end of the stage, you end up losing the chance and would have to reset the whole game to try again. In a way, it's one of those games that tried to do as much as possible for a 2D Sonic game on a limited console, but it happened. And what if I told you that Sonic Adventure is actually an anniversary game? That's one of the most unbelievable things, right? 10th anniversary? That's better than 35. A lot of people love this game precisely because it introduced Shadow for the first time. Besides the improved gameplay, the other characters also add more variety. Sonic focused on speed, Tails basically being the human tank, and Knuckles pretty much always hunting for emerald pieces like he always did. Besides a story divided between the hero team and the villain team in a very tense atmosphere of espionage, almost like a race against time. Since in this game, Eggman became famous because he was going to do something horrible, this is the game where the meme about him peeing came from. And you know, he peed on the moon. For example, it disrupts the usual routine of walking around the hub and moving from stage to stage. Adding the villain's perspective also changes the game's pace, which many people appreciate. I don't understand how people can hate this game since it's one of the most beloved games out there. And Sonic Adventure 2 was forgotten for a long time, because after a long time it was ported to pretty much every console. After Sonic the Hedgehog 3 referenced the game, many people sought it out to experience the original story that inspired the beloved movie. The game was very successful, even more so after its release. That's not the case with Sonic, which was released for the Game Boy Advance. I know you don't know, but this is also an anniversary game. It was released to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, and it all started with a horrible port of Sonic 1 from the Mega Drive released directly for the Game Boy Advance. The console was more powerful, but it was badly optimized. The game gets stuck so often that it barely feels like a Sonic game. Besides that, many of the effects and also the backgrounds end up freezing the game, making you lose, for example, chances to get a Chaos Emerald or even to jump on the right platforms. Not to mention the Labyrinth Zone stage, which should be the slowest stage in the game, but man, the physics get totally inconsistent, with you going fast and slow at random moments. Man, it's hard to defend this game, although I've already tested this version and I can say that you can even get through it if you like Sonic games. Even so, it's really hard to accept this as a decent version. It's a very strange port. Even the mobile versions of Sonic 1, which were released for Java years and years ago, are infinitely better than this version here. They only add one thing: Anniversary Mode, which basically gives you, for example, the ability to use the spin dash. But man, in a game that stutters this much, this is pretty much useless. Even so, SEGA went ahead with this project and thought it was a good idea to release a port like this. Nowadays, a port like this would get cancelled immediately, but the thing is, back then, anything was welcome. And believe me, on a Nintendo platform, any Sonic game was a novelty at that time. And the port of the first game, man, like this was unacceptable. But that's what they got. I can imagine what those guys who played back then were thinking. Was this what rivaled Mario? It had to be a joke. Sonic Frontiers is basically the anniversary game. Wasn't it meant to be a celebration? But it's a game that was supposed to usher in a new evolution, coming with short comics about its story, a much more dramatic arc, a much bigger presence of Super Sonic, and at the same time you had open environments and also a bunch of puzzles. Yeah, this was one of the most unbelievably different Sonic games. At the time, I was really disappointed with this game. Dramatic story elements mixed with more open-world gameplay elements was one of those things that honestly, I just couldn't accept. But at the same time, I realized that this game actually had a lot of good things. That really helped a lot back then to, come around on the gameplay. It's an open world with several Sonic minigames, melancholic moments, old references to the franchise, and also self-reflection from the characters themselves about their destinies and what Sonic was carrying to save everyone. Besides, this also explained a bit about the origins of the Sonic universe, like, for example, how the Chaos Emeralds arrived on the planet Mobius, where Sonic lives. Minigame elements that reference Sonic and also RPG elements also helped in the story of this game, although if you know what you're doing, you just need to use the fishing minigame. It's a quick way for you to reach level 99 in attack and defense. Seriously, but this game managed to be what everyone expected. A game that would bring Sonic into a new era, and in fact, it did. Whether you like it or not, it was the most successful game for Sonic so far. That's right. But what I find funny is that there's another game which you can probably guess that tried to be a kind of soft reboot. A new era for Sonic. Man, this went so wrong. Sonic Boom. A lot of people know it from the cartoon, but the original project was to make games. The idea here was that Sonic came from an earlier era and basically had to deal with a new threat. Lyric, who was basically a worm in armor and a threat to Sonic's group. And this game was extremely different from what a Sonic game would normally be. It's similar to Crash of the Titans, let's say, because it changes all the original protagonist's traits and gameplay into a kind of combat-focused style. SEGA thought it was a good idea to make a Ratchet and Clank clone with Sonic, and this is what came out. The game had a lot of potential since it was a game that brought together several reimagined characters. Metal Sonic Shadow group gameplay with Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and even Sonic himself. But all of that was kind of left aside because SEGA basically took this project and ended up restarting it several times. And then they put it on a console that wasn't capable of running a game like this, like the Wii U. Just so you know, it was supposed to be built in CryEngine for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. But porting it to the Wii U, which didn't really support that, man, believe me, the game ended up suffering a lot because of that. Is the game bad? Man, I'll tell you that I can see a lot of good qualities here. But SEGA's ambition at that time was to make a game that would attract new fans to Sonic and bring Sonic into a new era. Many other games were supposed to come out besides the sequel that came out on the 3DS. It was also supposed to get more sequels on consoles. If everything had worked out back then, SEGA would have managed to give Sonic a new series that would continue to this day. It's very likely that, literally, this whole Sonic version in Sonic Boom would have replaced modern Sonic. But that didn't end up happening. The game has some really lame jokes, they're amazing, even lamer than the jokes that came from the TV cartoons universe. Its release was really rushed and the budget and team made it so that it was split between groups working on the mobile version. No, sorry. Calling it mobile is wild, right? I mean 3DS. And this division made the game lose a lot of its main focus. It was supposed to be a big comeback, a new era for Sonic, new gameplay, a new way to get to know Sonic. But it feels more like one of those weird Ratchet and Clank clones that were released back in the PlayStation 2 era, but with Sonic characters and a story that pretty much nobody cares about. A lot of things were wasted here. Many concepts were discarded and the game ended up feeling like, man, something was missing. And it should have been much better. But it just wasn't. Just goes to show. Not always do the biggest and best projects or ideas turn out the way they should. There's a lot more story behind each of these games here. Both the loved ones and the hated ones. I've discussed all of them on the channel and could make more videos like this, but I'll stop here for now. Thanks a lot. See you in the next video.